A quiet suburban street, bathed in the fading light of evening, seemed like the last place danger would strike. Yet in a matter of seconds, innocence was stolen. A young black girl vanished, pulled into a vehicle by men who believed they had chosen their victim wisely. To them, she was just another child, an easy target. What they didn't know was that her father, disciplined, relentless, and forged in the fires of combat, was a Navy SEAL. And when a man like that discovers his daughter is missing, there's no force on earth strong enough to stand in his way. Marcus Johnson was not the kind of man who stood out in a crowd. To neighbors, he was a quiet father who loved his daughter more than anything in the world. Few knew of his past. Years spent in the Navy had turned him into something far more than ordinary, a man trained to operate in silence, to fight in shadows, and to endure what most could not. Yet after leaving the military, Marcus craved only peace. He settled in a modest suburban neighborhood, far from the chaos of war, and built a new life for himself and his daughter, Maya. Maya was the center of his world, bright, kind, and endlessly curious. At just 12 years old, she carried a light that softened Marcus's hardened edges. Every morning he walked her to school. Every evening he made sure they shared dinner together, laughing and telling stories. To anyone who looked closely, their bond was unbreakable. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life lay something darker. Marcus knew the world could be cruel, and as a black father raising his daughter in a society reeled with prejudice, he was never free from worry. He noticed the way certain neighbors stared too long, the hushed comments whispered under breaths, and the subtle but undeniable sense that he and Maya were always being judged differently. Still, he believed his watchful eye and disciplined nature were enough to protect her. What he didn't realize was that danger was already circling closer than he could ever imagine, and when it came, it would strike not because of chance, but because of the very thing he had always feared, the color of their skin. The day had begun like any other. Marcus dropped Maya off at school, kissed her forehead, and reminded her to stay safe. It was a ritual that always brought him peace. But that afternoon, the unthinkable happened. As Maya walked home from a friend's house, a dark van slowed beside her. At first, she ignored it, focusing on the sound of her footsteps against the sidewalk. But then the doors flung open, and rough hands pulled her inside. In a matter of seconds, her world went black, muffled cries disappearing into the hum of traffic. The van sped away, leaving nothing but silence on the street. The men inside believed they had just taken another helpless child. What made their crime even more sinister was the reason behind it. This wasn't random. They had been watching, waiting, and they chose Maya because she was black, convinced no one would fight for her as fiercely as if she'd been someone else's daughter. To them, she was a target society would overlook, a girl whose disappearance might not even make headlines. But they were wrong. When Marcus realized Maya wasn't home on time, dread hit him instantly. Years of combat had sharpened his instincts, and every fiber of his being screamed that something was wrong. He searched the neighborhood, knocking on doors, his pulse thundering as fear twisted in his chest. Within minutes, he found a discarded backpack at the edge of the road, Maya's. The sight nearly brought him to his knees. As he reported her missing, Marcus noticed a subtle indifference in the officer's tone. The questions felt mechanical, detached, as though another missing black child was not a priority. Rage burned through him, but he kept his composure, every muscle in his body vibrating with determination. He had trained for war zones, for missions that seemed impossible. He would not let bureaucracy or prejudice slow him down. That night, he sat alone in the quiet of his home, staring at Maya's picture. He thought of the men who had taken her, their arrogance, their cruelty. They believed they had stolen power from him, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had awakened the part of him he had buried deep, the warrior. With every second that passed, his resolve hardened. He would track them, he would outsmart them, and he would show them the brutal truth. They hadn't taken just any little girl. They had taken the daughter of a Navy SEAL. Marcus tracked the kidnappers with the precision of a hunter. Every clue, every fragment of information became part of a larger map only he could read. He discovered their hideout on the outskirts of town, an abandoned warehouse where shadows moved behind broken windows. The police had dismissed his urgency, But Marcus had no time for hesitation. His daughter's life hung in the balance, and he was prepared to do what he had been trained for: infiltrate, adapt, and eliminate threats. As night fell, Marcus moved with deadly silence. His boots touched the ground like whispers, his breathing steady and controlled. The warehouse reeked of gasoline and decay, but he pushed forward, ears tuned to the faint sound of Maya's muffled cries. The men inside were confident, laughing as though they had already won. They had no idea who was coming for them. Marcus slipped into shadows, disabling one guard with swift precision before the man even realized he was being watched. Another was taken down moments later, his body crumpling to the floor without a sound. The deeper Marcus went, the more his fury surged. Each step reminded him of the racism that had fueled this act, the arrogance of men who believed his daughter's life mattered less. That fire gave him strength. Finally, he reached the room where Maya was held. 2 kidnappers stood guard, armed and unprepared for the storm about to hit them. Marcus struck like lightning, years of combat skills exploding in controlled violence. One man dropped instantly, the other stumbling before being forced into submission. When Maya's tear-filled eyes met his, relief washed over him. He untied her, pulling her close, his heart pounded with both rage and love. The men who had stolen her innocence now lay broken, their cruel plan destroyed. Marcus didn't need to speak. His actions had delivered the only message they would ever understand. You do not take what belongs to him, and you do not touch his daughter. The sirens arrived long after the fight was over. By the time officers stormed the warehouse, the kidnappers lay incapacitated, their arrogance crushed beneath the weight of a father's fury. Maya clung tightly to Marcus, trembling but safe, her small frame pressed against the chest of the man who had walked through hell to reach her. The officers looked stunned, staring at the scene as though they couldn't comprehend how one man had dismantled an entire operation. But Marcus didn't care about their judgment. He wasn't looking for approval. All that mattered was the steady rhythm of Maya's heartbeat against his own, proof that she was alive, proof that he hadn't failed her. In the days that followed, whispers spread across the community. Some called Marcus a hero. Others questioned how the system had allowed things to get this far, how it had dismissed the abduction of a young black girl as though her life was worth less. For Marcus, the answer was painfully clear. Racism wasn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it was quiet, hidden in the indifference of those who should protect, in the hesitation to act, in the way certain children's disappearances sparked outrage, while others barely made the news. Maya's rescue was not just a father's victory. It was a stark reminder that the fight for justice doesn't end on battlefields overseas. Sometimes it begins at home, on quiet streets, in overlooked neighborhoods, in the silent battles waged by parents who refuse to let their children be forgotten. As Marcus watched Maya sleep safely in her bed again, he knew their lives would never be the same. He had defeated the men who tried to break him, but the greater enemy, the prejudice that had fueled their crime, still lingered in the world around them. And so the story leaves us with a question. How many more children must be stolen? How many more lives dismissed before society decides that every child's life holds the same worth?